Roger Mark de Souza is Director of Population, Environmental Security and Resilience for the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. He joins us for this edition of Now. Roger Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you about the presentation you recently did. The title was Natural Resources, Conflict, and Peace Building. Tell us about what that was about and who you were presenting to.
So just most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the NAFSA, which is the International Association of Educators, comprised mostly of university and college administrators and faculty who are working to internationalize campuses and universities throughout the United States. And they invited me to come in and talk to their membership about these issues and what it meant for U.S. students and for international students studying here in the United States.
And the issue, what is the connection between resources and conflict?
It's very interesting. When we look at how natural resources are tied to conflict, we see that they very much serve as a multiplier. They're connected, but they're not direct connections. And generally, we talk about these connections in three ways. The first is questions around resource scarcity. When there are limited natural resources, we usually find in conflict situations evidence of one group dominating those resources and managing it, and that causes conflict. The second area is area of resource scarcity. When there's limited natural resources, these tend to be renewable resources such as water, land, wildlife, and one group seeks to control the access to those resources, and that leads to conflict and instability. And the third is what we call a resource curse, and that is when a country or an area comes to depend and over-depend on a resource, such as oil or natural gas, to their detriment overall.
Because of third-party exploitation?
Because of third-party exploitation, because of an over-reliance on that particular resource.
Not a diverse enough economy.
Not a diverse enough economy, but also not being able to control the price of that commodity on the international market.
And I'm guessing this is not a static situation. So are things getting worse in any of these areas? If we would isolate a certain part of the globe, where are the hot spots?
There are lots of hot spots in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East and North Africa, as you would anticipate. And interestingly enough, in certain parts of the Amazon, in the Western Amazon. Most recently, we hosted an author here who presented her work on oil sparks in the Amazon and its impact on indigenous peoples. So here is an emerging part of the world where typically we would not think of resource and oil conflicts, but it's emerging and it's increasingly important. And diplomats and politicians and policymakers need to pay attention because it can accelerate and lead to increased instability globally.
And the audience you were presenting to is, as you mentioned, the education community. And what's the role of education as part of the solution to some of these problems?
You know, it's very interesting because we're looking at international education, and both you and I have children who've recently graduated, yes, going to college now, and we sort of wonder, well, what kind of environment are they going into in terms of learning? How will they be learning about these issues? And if they think of international education, it is no longer just study abroad. How will they come out as global citizens? Will they have a sense of people-to-people diplomacy and the tools to deal with these issues? And then ultimately, how equipped will they be in terms of being able to find jobs? So it's a question of global workforce development. So international education efforts are recognizing the importance of these trends like conflict, like natural resource management, like population dynamics, and saying this is important for today's world, for our children, and for future generations, and we need to address it now. And this is what is happening on campuses.
Are there examples of this taking place already where you can measure impact and decide that this is actually part of a solution on the ground?
Yes, and I think what we do here at the Woodrow Wilson Center is focus on international education and what it means. We work very closely with students, and I'll give you just this week, we have welcomed an intern from West Point. So you have an intern from West Point who is really in the midst of his military career and saying, I should be thinking about globalization and conflict and natural resource management and the military. So we're really formulating that consciousness right now. And there's a very clear sense that when people are devoting their energies and their careers to this, that there are concrete outputs in terms of diplomacy and peaceful outcomes and results.
Forgive me if I'm the uninitiated here, not understanding this, but it seems part of what you're describing is, and I hate to use a trite word, but a holistic approach, a connecting of the dots, that you can't look at this from one particular discipline, whether you're an NGO or a military or whatever. All the dots connect, or all the situations overlap. Is that
I think that's correct, but that's not necessarily easy to do. It's important to do. I was chatting with a journalist earlier this week, and he said to me, in doing this work at the Woodrow Wilson Center, what are you most surprised about? And I said to her that I was surprised that when I talk to military generals, or I talk to environmentalists, or I talk to donors, that these issues of integration are now all the more apparent. We've just seen this in the global report on climate change that was produced by the IPCC, recognizing that integration and the connection between the environment, conflict, and overall development is all the more important. And increasingly, folks are talking about resilience and the importance of resilience and sustainability in a world that's rapidly changing because of climate change and disasters. Just yesterday, someone said to me, climate change changes everything, and it does.
Well, and this is the first of a series of conversations we'll be having, and so we've teed up so much to talk about. But before we close today, I want to ask you about upcoming World Population Day. I would imagine population is another thing that puts a stress on resources. Tell us what you have planned for World Population Day.
So World Population Day is on July the 11th, and just before, we will be convening a dialogue with the head of the UNFPA, the World Population Organization of the United Nations, who will be looking at the importance of population dynamics, not just population growth, but age structure, youth, adolescence, and what it means for overall development. He will be discussing these issues with the Deputy Administrator for Health from USAID and from a CEO of an environmental and population organization that is looking at why this is so critical today and why we must act now.
And if you can't be here with us, there will be a live webcast at wilsoncenter.org. Roger Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
See you again.